Eleanor Morgan loved days like this. The morning sun filtered through the forest canopy, creating dappled patterns on the leaf-strewn path beneath her hiking boots. The air felt crisp and clean, carrying the earthy scent of decomposing leaves and pine that always reminded her why she'd become a biology teacher in the first place. "Remember to note the different soil colors in your journals," she called out to her students, who were scattered along the trail in small groups. 26 teenagers, all dressed in the blue and gray colors of Westridge High, knelt in various spots collecting samples or scribbling observations. Some looked genuinely interested. Others seemed more concerned with avoiding dirt on their jeans. "Ms. Morgan," a hand shot up from a group near a fallen oak. "We found 3 different types of mushrooms. Is that normal in one spot?" Eleanor smiled, adjusting her backpack as she walked over. After 15 years of teaching, these moments still gave her a thrill, seeing that spark of curiosity ignite. "That's a great observation, Raj." She crouched beside the group of 4 students. "Forests are like apartment buildings. Different species live on different floors. Some prefer the nutrients in new fall leaves, others thrive deeper in the soil." She gently turned over a piece of rotting wood to reveal more fungi underneath. The students leaned in, forgetting briefly about their clean clothes. "Whoa, gross," said a girl with curly hair pulled back in a ponytail. "But kind of cool too." "Nature's recycling crew," Eleanor explained. "Without them, we'd be buried under mountains of dead plants." This annual field trip to Oak Ridge Forest Preserve was Eleanor's favorite teaching day. The forest sat just 20 miles from their suburban school but felt like stepping into another world. The 400-acre woodland had been protected from development 50 years ago, and now served as a living classroom for schools across the county. Ms. M. Another student waved from farther down the trail. "Tyler says this spider is poisonous, but I think he's just trying to scare me." Eleanor laughed. "Coming, Zoe." She stood up, her knees cracking slightly. At 42, she wasn't old, but days spent hunched over lab tables took their toll. "Raj, make sure your group takes photos of those mushroom formations before moving on," she instructed, then headed down the path toward the spider debate. Her teaching assistant, David Chen, was supervising another group by the small stream that cut through the eastern section of the forest. He gave her a thumbs up, indicating everything was under control in his area. David was a graduate student at the nearby university, earning credits by helping with her advanced placement biology classes. The kids liked him. He was young enough to seem cool but knowledgeable enough to command respect. Eleanor resolved the spider situation, a harmless wolf spider, not dangerous despite its intimidating size, and continued along the path, making mental notes for her evening report. The preserve rangers asked teachers to document any significant changes they noticed year to year, part of the ongoing monitoring of the forest's health. She paused to take a drink from her water bottle, glancing around at the groups of students. All accounted for, all engaged in their assigned tasks. The morning was going perfectly according to plan. That's when she saw it. A flash of something metallic through the trees, maybe 30 yards off the marked trail. Eleanor frowned. This was a protected area. No vehicles were permitted beyond the parking lot at the visitor center half a mile back. She hesitated, looking at her watch. They had another hour scheduled for this section before moving to the pond area for aquatic sampling. The students were safely occupied with David nearby. "David," she called, waving him over. "I'm going to check something out over there. Keep everyone on the trail, okay? I'll be back in a few minutes." "Everything all right?" he asked, squinting in the direction she'd indicated. "Probably nothing. Just saw something that shouldn't be there." Eleanor stepped carefully off the path, making a mental note of her route. Though she knew this forest well, wandering off trail was generally discouraged. But as a regular research volunteer for the preserve, she felt a responsibility to investigate potential issues. The underbrush thickened as she moved away from the maintained trail. Brambles caught at her khaki pants, and low-hanging branches forced her to duck occasionally. The metallic glint appeared and disappeared as she approached, filtered through the dense vegetation. 5 minutes of careful navigation brought her to a small clearing. Eleanor stopped short, her breath catching in surprise. An armored truck sat nestled among the trees, its boxy shape incongruous against the natural backdrop. Not just any vehicle, but a security truck, the kind used to transport money or valuables. The white paint was dirty and weathered, with faded lettering on the side that had been partially scraped away, making it unreadable. "What on earth?" she murmured, approaching cautiously. The truck looked like it had been there for some time. Leaves had collected on its roof and hood. The tires were flat, and vines had begun to climb up from the forest floor. Embracing the wheel wells in a slow reclamation, Eleanor circled the vehicle slowly, her teacher's mind automatically cataloging details. No broken windows. No visible crash damage. It was as if someone had deliberately driven it here, deep into the forest where no roads existed, and simply left it. She pulled out her phone and took several pictures, then checked for reception. Only one bar, typical for this part of the woods. She'd report it once they returned to the visitor center. As she completed her circle of the truck, she noticed the driver's side door was slightly ajar, just an inch or two, but enough to draw her attention. Something about it sent a small shiver down her spine despite the warm day. Eleanor glanced back toward the direction of the trail. She could faintly hear her students' voices, the normal chatter of their fieldwork continuing undisturbed. David would keep them safe and occupied. Pulling a pen from her jacket pocket, she carefully pushed the door open wider, using the pen rather than her fingers, an instinct from the crime shows she occasionally watched. The door creaked loudly in the quiet forest. The cab was empty. The keys hung from the ignition, a small leather fob dangling below them. Fast food wrappers littered the passenger seat floor. A clipboard with some kind of manifest lay face down on the seat itself. This was becoming stranger by the minute. Eleanor knew she should probably back away and call the Rangers immediately. But the scientist in her, the part that had earned her a PhD before she'd chosen teaching over research, wanted more data. She moved toward the back of the truck. The rear doors were secured with a heavy padlock, but as she looked closer, she noticed it was damaged. The hasp was bent and partially broken, as if someone had tried to force it open but given up part way. When she touched it lightly with her pen, the mechanism shifted. Rust flakes drifted down as the damaged lock loosened further. With one more gentle prod, it fell away completely, landing in the leaves with a muffled thud. For a moment, Eleanor stood frozen, uncertain whether to proceed. This clearly wasn't her business. Whatever was happening here felt wrong. Abandoned security vehicles didn't simply appear in protected forest land. But what if there was something environmental at stake? What if this was connected to the illegal logging operation they'd discovered in the north section last year? As someone dedicated to protecting this forest, didn't she have a responsibility to gather information? The heavy door swung outward with surprising ease when she pulled gently on the handle. Eleanor blinked, her eyes adjusting to the dimness inside the truck. Then her heart skipped a beat as the contents came into focus. Instead of money or valuables, the cargo area was filled with shelving units bolted to the walls. And on those shelves sat dozens of containers, specimen jars, collection tubes, and preservation tanks. The biology teacher in her recognized them instantly. These were scientific samples. But as she leaned closer, reading the labels with growing disbelief, she realized these weren't just any samples. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. What she was looking at would change everything. For her students, and for the scientific community she had left behind years ago. And in that moment, standing alone in the forest with this extraordinary discovery, Eleanor didn't yet realize how much her own life was about to transform. She pulled out her phone again, this time to document what was inside. The single reception bar flickered as she raised the device. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. Her simple field trip had just become something much more important. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she held up her phone, the flashlight beam cutting through the dimness inside the truck. The light reflected off glass containers of various sizes, creating eerie shadows against the metal walls. She stepped closer, careful not to touch anything. The shelving units had been professionally installed, not some hasty aftermarket addition. This truck had been specifically outfitted for transporting biological specimens. But why here, in the middle of a protected forest preserve? She leaned in to examine the nearest container, a cylindrical jar about the size of a coffee can. Inside, suspended in clear liquid, was what appeared to be a plant specimen, a small section of root system with unusual nodules along its length. A waterproof label adhered to the glass bore a scientific notation she recognized from her years in research. GPS coordinates, collection date, and a species code. The date caught her attention immediately. 3 months ago. This wasn't some long-abandoned vehicle. Whatever had happened here was recent. Eleanor moved along the shelves, scanning the containers. More plant specimens, soil samples, and sealed bags, and then she stopped abruptly. The next section held smaller vials and refrigerated units still humming quietly, drawing power from what must be the truck's auxiliary system. These contained blood and tissue samples, each meticulously labeled with the same coding system. This can't be legal, she whispered to herself, backing away slightly. Scientific collection required permits, especially in protected areas. Her own research students had to file paperwork just to remove leaf litter samples. Whatever operation this represented went far beyond unauthorized collection. The specialized equipment and systematic labeling suggested something organized and deliberate. A noise from outside snapped. Eleanor back to reality. She turned quickly, but it was just a squirrel dropping an acorn onto the truck's roof. Still, it reminded her that she'd left 26 students on the trail with David. She needed to get back. Yet something about one of the specimen jars caught her eye as she prepared to leave. She stepped closer again, focusing her phone's light on a container slightly larger than the others. Inside was a flowering plant specimen she didn't immediately recognize, unusual in itself, since Eleanor prided herself on knowing every plant species in the county. The label bore a red stripe, different from the others. She took a close-up photo, then backed out of the truck, carefully pulling the door closed. It wouldn't lock without the padlock, but at least it looked undisturbed at first glance. After a moment's consideration, she picked up the broken lock and placed it in her jacket pocket. Evidence, she told herself, though of what crime she wasn't entirely sure. The journey back to the trail seemed quicker, her mind racing faster than her feet could carry her through the underbrush. By the time she emerged onto the path, she had already formulated a plan. David spotted her first, raising an eyebrow at what must have been her serious expression. "Everything okay?" he asked as she approached. Eleanor nodded briskly. "Fine. Just needed to check something." She glanced at her watch. "It's nearly time to head to the pond section. Can you get everyone packed up?" As David gathered the students, Eleanor pulled out her phone again. 1 bar of reception. Not enough for a good call, but maybe enough for a text. She pulled up her contacts and found Ranger Ben Thompson's number. They'd worked together on several educational programs over the years, and she trusted his judgment. "Found abandoned armored truck in East Section," she typed. "Full of biological specimens. Looks professional. Concerning. Can meet at Visitor Center in 2 hours." The message hung on sending for nearly 30 seconds before the confirmation appeared. She tucked the phone away, composing herself before turning to face her students. "Who's ready to find some tadpoles?" she called out with forced cheerfulness. The next hour passed in a blur. Eleanor went through the motions of the lesson at the forest pond, helping students identify aquatic organisms and test water quality. But her mind kept returning to the truck and its mysterious cargo. Several times, students had to repeat questions before she responded. "You seem distracted, Miss Morgan," observed Layla, one of her sharpest students. "Did something happen in the woods?" Eleanor managed a smile. "Just thinking about next week's exam. Let's focus on completing your sampling sheets." By the time they packed up to return to the visitor center, Eleanor had decided not to mention the truck to her students. Not until she understood what they were dealing with. The last thing she needed was 26 teenagers trampling through the forest looking for an abandoned vehicle, potentially contaminating what might be a crime scene. The ranger station at the visitor center was a small cabin-like structure adjacent to the main building. Eleanor directed David to supervise lunch at the picnic area, while she checked in with the rangers, a normal part of their field trip routine. Ben Thompson met her at the door, his normally relaxed face set in serious lines. At 50-something with sun-weathered skin and salt and pepper hair, he looked every bit the veteran park ranger. "I got your text," he said without preamble. "Show me the photos." Eleanor pulled out her phone and handed it over. Ben scrolled through the images slowly, his frown deepening with each swipe. "This is on our land? You're sure?" "About half a mile east of marker 16, there's no road access anywhere near there." Ben handed the phone back. "And you said these are biological samples? Not drugs or something?" Eleanor shook her head firmly. "I've worked in enough labs to know what scientific specimens look like. These are professionally collected and preserved biological samples, plants, soil, possibly animal tissue. The labeling system is consistent with research protocols. But no identification? No university or company name? None that I could see. The exterior logos had been deliberately removed. She pulled the broken padlock from her pocket. This was on the back doors. It was already damaged. I didn't break it. Ben took the lock, turning it over in his hands. This isn't good, Eleanor. We've had reports of unauthorized vehicles in the preserve 3 times this month, but patrols never found anything. I thought it was just teenagers joyriding on the maintenance roads. He placed the lock on his desk and reached for the radio on his belt. I'm calling this in. Fish and Wildlife Service should be notified if someone's poaching specimens from protected land. Eleanor suddenly felt the weight of what she'd discovered. What had seemed like an interesting anomaly in the woods was quickly becoming something much more serious. My students don't know anything about this, she said quickly. I didn't want them involved. Ben nodded approvingly. Good call. Best they stay clear until we know what we're dealing with. He paused before pressing the radio button. That red striped label you mentioned, was it on this plant? He pointed to one of the photos on her phone. Eleanor nodded. I thought so, he said grimly. That's a tagging system used for rare or endangered species. Whoever collected these knows exactly what they're doing. A chill ran through Eleanor despite the warm office. Endangered species trafficking was serious. Federal offense serious. She'd stumbled into something far bigger than a simple rule violation. Should I be worried? She asked quietly. Ben considered this. Hard to say. The truck being abandoned suggests something went wrong with whatever operation this was, but I'd keep your eyes open, just in case. He pressed the radio button. This is Ranger Thompson. We have a situation at Oak Ridge. I need to report a possible Code 31. As Ben spoke with his supervisor, Eleanor gazed out the window at her students eating lunch at the picnic tables. They were laughing, comparing notes from their field journals, completely unaware of what their teacher had discovered. She thought about the strange plant specimen with the red stripe. Throughout her career, she'd emphasized to students the importance of biodiversity and protecting endangered species. Now she'd stumbled upon what appeared to be a direct threat to that principle, in her own beloved forest. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders. Whatever happened next, she was already involved. And somehow, she knew her life was about to become much more complicated than simply teaching photosynthesis to high schoolers. By mid-afternoon, the quiet visitor center had transformed into a hub of activity. 2 Fish and Wildlife Service vehicles were parked outside, along with a county sheriff's SUV and what Eleanor recognized as an evidence collection van. She sat on a bench near the ranger station, watching people in various uniforms move purposefully between buildings. Her students had left an hour ago. The school bus driver had been confused by the early departure, but Eleanor had explained it away as a change in the weather forecast. The kids, tired from a day of outdoor work, hadn't complained about heading back early. David had offered to stay, sensing something was wrong, but Eleanor insisted he return with the class. Make sure they organize their field notes, she'd instructed. I'll be back as soon as I can. Now she waited, clutching a paper cup of lukewarm coffee someone had handed her. The forest preserve, normally so peaceful, echoed with radio chatter and the occasional slam of vehicle doors. Dr. Morgan? A woman in a dark green Fish and Wildlife Service uniform approached. She was tall and angular, with short gray hair tucked under her official cap. I'm Agent Lisa Whitaker. I understand you're the one who found our truck? Eleanor stood surprised by the "our truck" comment. You know whose it is? Agent Whitaker gestured toward the bench. Mind if we sit? It's been a long day already, and it's about to get longer. Once seated, the agent pulled out a small notebook. The vehicle was reported stolen from a fish and wildlife research facility in Maryland 3 months ago. It was being used to transport specimens for a captive breeding program for endangered species. So this is your operation? Eleanor felt a wave of relief. Not illegal trafficking, then. Just a stolen government vehicle. The agent's expression remained serious. Not exactly. The truck was stolen, yes, but what you described inside doesn't match our manifest. Our truck was empty when it was taken, headed to pick up, not already loaded. And we certainly don't use red striping on our labels. That's concerning. Eleanor's momentary relief vanished. What does it mean? We're not sure yet. That's why I need you to show us exactly where you found it. A team is assembling now. Within 20 minutes, Eleanor found herself leading a small procession back into the forest. Ranger Ben took point with Eleanor right behind him. Following were Agent Whitaker, another federal agent whose name she hadn't caught, and two evidence technicians carrying equipment cases. Just past those fallen birch trees, Eleanor directed as they approached the area, through that denser section of underbrush. The group moved methodically, careful not to disturb the ground more than necessary. Eleanor noticed they all wore gloves, and the technicians occasionally stopped to photograph something on the forest floor. Tire tracks, she realized, and footprints that weren't from her earlier visit. When they reached the clearing, Agent Whitaker held up a hand, stopping everyone. "Dr. Morgan, please point to where you stood when examining the vehicle. We need to preserve any evidence that isn't yours." Eleanor indicated her path around the truck from that morning, explaining where she'd touched the door and the broken lock. The technicians moved forward, placing small numbered markers on the ground and taking photos. The truck looked exactly as she'd left it, rear doors still closed but unlocked. The forest was quieter now, the afternoon birds having settled into their midday lull. Only the clicking of camera shutters broke the silence. "Would you recognize any of the specimens if you saw them again?" Agent Whitaker asked as they watched the techs work. Eleanor nodded slowly. "Some of them, especially that plant with the red striped label. I've never seen anything quite like it, which is unusual for this region." "That's what we're most interested in," the agent said. "Based on your photos, our botanist thinks it might be Trillium persistens, white-fringed trillium. It's critically endangered, with only a few known populations left in Georgia. Definitely not native to these woods." A tech approached them, holding up a tablet. "We're ready to open the back, ma'am." For the next hour, Eleanor watched as the team carefully documented and removed items from the truck. Each container was photographed in place, then sealed in evidence bags. The refrigerated units were connected to portable power sources to maintain their temperature. "Is that what I think it is?" Eleanor asked when they removed a larger tank from a bottom shelf. Agent Whitaker peered at it. "If you're thinking turtle eggs, then yes. Box turtle by the looks of it. Also endangered." As the cataloging continued, a disturbing pattern emerged. Every specimen bore coordinates from different protected areas across the eastern United States. All were rare or endangered species. All had been collected within the past 4 months. "This is a professional operation," the second agent remarked, examining the labeling system. "These aren't amateurs grabbing whatever they can find. They're targeting specific populations with scientific precision. The question is why?" Agent Whitaker added. "Endangered species trafficking usually involves live animals for exotic pet trade, or plants for collectors. This is different. These are research-grade samples." Eleanor leaned against a tree, trying to process what she was seeing. Her discovery was evolving into something far more complex than she'd imagined. Not just a crime, but a mystery. The radio on Ranger Ben's belt crackled to life. "Thompson, come in. Over." He stepped away to answer, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he listened. When he returned, he beckoned Agent Whitaker aside. They spoke in hushed tones, with occasional glances toward Eleanor. Finally, they both approached her. "There's been a development," Agent Whitaker said carefully. "Someone accessed your school's personnel database this morning. They were specifically looking at your file." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling afternoon air. "What? How do you know that?" "We put a flag on your information as soon as you reported this," Ben explained. "Standard procedure when a civilian becomes involved in an ongoing investigation." "Ongoing? You knew about this before today?" Agent Whitaker's expression remained neutral. "We've been tracking a series of biological thefts from preserves along the eastern seaboard. Until now, we didn't have a solid lead on who was behind it or what they were doing with the specimens." The implications hit Eleanor like a physical blow. "You think whoever abandoned this truck might come looking for me?" "Why would they? I didn't take anything." "You took photos," Ben reminded her gently. "And you reported it. If someone's monitoring police bands or has contacts in law enforcement, we're not trying to frighten you," Agent Whitaker said, though her tone did little to reassure. "But we need to take precautions. The school is secure and we'll have someone watching your home tonight." Eleanor thought of her small house on the edge of town, its back deck facing the woods she'd always found so comforting. Suddenly, the idea of those trees concealing unknown watchers seemed less peaceful. "What about my students?" she asked. They were with me in the forest. They never saw the truck, correct? Never knew what you found? Eleanor nodded, grateful now for her decision to keep them away from the discovery. Then they should be fine. It's you we're concerned about. The agent handed Eleanor a card. My direct line. Call if you notice anything unusual, no matter how small. As the evidence collection continued, Eleanor sat on a fallen log, watching the forest grow darker with the approaching evening. The team had set up portable lights to continue their work, creating a surreal bubble of activity in the wilderness. Her phone buzzed with a text from the school principal. Everything okay? Heard there's some kind of situation at the preserve. News traveled fast in small towns. By tomorrow, everyone would know something had happened. Eleanor typed a vague reply about assisting rangers with a research project, then put the phone away. One of the texts emerged from the truck, carefully carrying a container Eleanor hadn't seen before. It had been hidden behind the others, secured in a special compartment. Unlike the scientific specimens, this was a simple mason jar. Inside was soil. Ordinary looking at first glance, but as the tech tilted it under the lights, Eleanor spotted tiny metallic flecks catching the glow. What is that? She asked, standing to get a better look. Not sure, the tech replied, but it's definitely not biological. We'll run tests back at the lab. Agent Whitaker appeared beside them, examining the jar with intense interest. Where exactly was this found? Hidden compartment, rear wall. Would have been overlooked if Dr. Morgan hadn't mentioned the plant specimen next to it. Eleanor felt a flutter of unease. There was something about that soil sample. Something familiar from her research days that nagged at her memory. The metallic glints reminded her of microplastics, she suggested. Or perhaps mineral deposits? The agent and tech exchanged a look Eleanor couldn't quite interpret. Maybe. Agent Whitaker said. We'll know more soon. She turned to Eleanor. It's getting late. Ranger Thompson will drive you home. We'll continue working here overnight. As Eleanor gathered her backpack, she noticed the jar being placed in a special container, handled with more care than the biological specimens had been. Whatever was in that soil had changed the energy of the investigation. And somehow she knew it connected to why someone might be looking into her background. Not because she'd found the truck, but because with her background in biology she might understand what they'd been collecting, and why. Eleanor barely slept that night. Every creak of her old farmhouse, every rustle of wind through the trees outside her window, jerked her awake. The unmarked car parked at the end of her driveway, meant to reassure her, only served as a constant reminder of potential danger. By morning, she had convinced herself she was overreacting. She was just a teacher who'd stumbled onto something strange. Surely whoever had abandoned that truck had bigger concerns than one biology teacher. Still, she found herself checking her rearview mirror more often as she drove to school, noticing unfamiliar cars with newfound suspicion. The world felt slightly off kilter, as if she'd stepped into someone else's life. The school hallways provided welcome normalcy. Students shuffled between classes, complaining about homework and weekend plans. Her first period class filed in, several immediately asking about yesterday's field trip. Ms. Morgan, did something happen at the forest? Asked Layla, her observant student from yesterday. My mom said there were government vehicles at the preserve all night. Eleanor had prepared for this. There was a research team collecting data. Nothing exciting, I'm afraid. Just scientific fieldwork. The lie felt awkward on her tongue. She rarely kept things from her students. Now let's get back to photosynthesis pathways. Yesterday's observations should help with today's lab. She managed to keep the classes focused. But during her planning period, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Please come to the visitor center after school. Important development. Whitaker. The day crawled by. When the final bell rang, Eleanor quickly packed her materials and headed to her car, telling colleagues she had a dentist appointment. The Forest Preserve Visitor Center was quieter than yesterday, though several official vehicles remained. Agent Whitaker met her at the entrance, looking like she hadn't slept either. Thank you for coming, she said, leading Eleanor to a small conference room in the back. We've made some discoveries I thought you should know about. Inside, maps and photos covered one wall, images of the truck, its contents, and various locations marked with pins. A laptop displayed data Eleanor couldn't make out from the doorway. Ranger Ben nodded at her from a corner chair. The soil sample, Whitaker began without preamble. You were partly right. It does contain mineral deposits, but not naturally occurring ones. She gestured to the laptop, where magnified images showed the metallic flecks Eleanor had noticed yesterday. These are particles of a rare earth metal called neodymium. It's used in everything from headphones to wind turbines, but it's incredibly difficult to mine and process. Most of the world's supply comes from China. Eleanor stepped closer to the screen. And this was found in American soil? That's unusual, extremely. Which is why we're now working with the Geological Survey and Department of Energy. Whitaker pointed to another image, a map with several red dots across the eastern United States. Each of these marks corresponds to GPS coordinates found on specimen containers in the truck. Eleanor's scientific mind started connecting dots. You think whoever stole the truck wasn't after endangered species at all? They were using the collection of rare plants and animals as cover for soil sampling? Exactly. The biological specimens were important. They helped the collectors blend in as legitimate researchers, but the soil was their real target. Ranger Ben spoke up. Explains why they hit protected areas. Those lands haven't been surveyed for mineral deposits in decades. Mining companies can't get permits to explore there. But rare earth metals are worth billions, Whitaker added. If someone discovered untapped deposits on protected land, they could put pressure on the government to open those areas for mining. Eleanor finished, understanding dawning. Especially with all the talk about securing domestic supply chains. A knock at the door interrupted them. A younger agent entered, handing Whitaker a folder. Results from the school database intrusion, he said quietly. Eleanor watched as Whitaker scanned the document, her expression hardening. What is it? Eleanor asked. The person who accessed your records didn't just look at your current information. They pulled your complete employment history and academic background. A cold feeling settled in Eleanor's stomach. Why would they care about that? Whitaker closed the folder. Before you became a teacher, you worked in environmental research, correct? Your dissertation was on soil microbiology and protected ecosystems. Eleanor nodded slowly. Of course. It wasn't just that she'd found the truck, it was who she was. They're worried I'll recognize what they're doing, she said quietly. I have the background to understand exactly what those soil samples mean. And to testify as an expert witness if this ever goes to court, Whitaker confirmed. Which makes you more than just an inconvenient witness. The implication hung heavily in the room. Eleanor sat down, suddenly needing the support of a chair. So what happens now? Do I need to leave town or something? Ranger Ben shook his head. That might actually draw more attention. For now, we think it's safer if you maintain your normal routine, with protection in place. We've identified the company behind this operation, Whitaker added. Nexus Minerals. They're a shell corporation for a larger international mining conglomerate. Very well connected politically, which is why we need to build an airtight case before moving on them. She pulled up another image on the laptop, a corporate logo featuring a stylized mountain. They specialize in environmentally responsible resource extraction, according to their website. But their track record suggests otherwise. Eleanor recognized the name with a jolt. They sponsored our school's science fair last year. Donated equipment to my classroom. A sickening realization hit her. They've been in our community for months. Setting up relationships, building goodwill, Whitaker confirmed. Standard procedure before they push for mining permits. The conference room suddenly felt too small, too confining. Eleanor stood up and paced to the window, looking out at the forest that had been her sanctuary for years. The thought of it being torn apart for mining operations made her physically ill. The truck, she said suddenly. You said it was stolen from a government facility. Was it actually stolen, or was that made to look like a theft? Whitaker's eyebrows raised slightly. We're investigating that angle. There have been concerning connections between some regulatory officials and private interests. Insider help would explain how they got access to protected areas without raising alarms. Ranger Ben added. Eleanor turned back to face them. So what can I do? I'm not hiding while they destroy these forests. A hint of a smile touched Whitaker's face, the first Eleanor had seen. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. We need someone who can help us understand exactly what they found and what it means. She gestured to the laptop. These soil analysis results need expert interpretation. Someone needs to explain in clear terms why these ecosystems are more valuable intact than mined, and it would be particularly helpful if that someone was a respected local educator. with no obvious connection to our investigation. "You want me to be your secret weapon?" Eleanor said, not sure whether to laugh or cry at the absurdity of it all. "We want you to do what you already do best, educate people about why these forests matter," Whitaker corrected. "While we build our case," Ranger Ben stood up. "There's a town council meeting next week. Nexus Minerals is on the agenda. Something about a community partnership announcement. Might be a good place to start asking public questions." Eleanor thought about her students, how they lit up when discovering something new in the forest. How many generations had explored these woods and how many more should have that chance? "I'll need to see all your data," she said, turning to the wall of evidence photos. "Everything you've collected, all the soil analyses." For the first time since finding that truck, she felt something beyond fear or confusion, determination, fueled by righteous anger. "And I'll need access to the preserve's historical surveys. If I'm going to protect this forest, I need to know exactly what we're fighting for." As Agent Whitaker began gathering files, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text. It was from the school principal. "Just got a call from Nexus Minerals. They want to expand their science program funding and requested you specifically as faculty advisor. Exciting opportunity." Eleanor showed the message to Whitaker, whose expression darkened. "They're making their move," the agent said quietly. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Eleanor thought about the quiet life she'd built, the simple joy of teaching biology to teenagers. That life had changed the moment she spotted a metal glint in the woods. "I don't think I have a choice anymore," she replied. "They came to my forest. They threatened my school. Now they'll have to deal with me." The town hall was packed. Eleanor had never seen so many people at a council meeting before. Rows of folding chairs had been added to accommodate the overflow crowd, and still people lined the walls, standing shoulder to shoulder. Local news had picked up the story about a major announcement from Nexus Minerals, promising economic development and jobs. Eleanor sat in the third row, a folder of documents on her lap, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure others could hear it. Agent Whitaker was somewhere in the back, dressed in civilian clothes. 2 other agents were positioned near the exits. Not that Eleanor could identify them in the crowd. The past week had been a blur of preparation. Days teaching her classes, maintaining a convincing facade of normalcy. Evenings poring over soil analyses, ecological impact studies, and legal precedents. Nights lying awake, wondering if she was doing the right thing. She'd met twice with Agent Whitaker and a Department of Justice attorney, carefully going through her testimony and the evidence they'd collected. The federal investigation was building, but it would take months to complete. Tonight's meeting couldn't wait that long. Mayor Reynolds called the meeting to order, his gavel barely audible over the murmur of excited conversations. First, item on tonight's agenda, a special presentation from Nexus Minerals regarding a proposed community partnership. He gestured to the side of the room. "Mr. Wilson, the floor is yours." A tall man in an expensive suit approached the podium. Everything about him exuded confidence, from his perfectly knotted tie to his practiced smile. 2 other Nexus employees joined him, a woman carrying presentation materials and a younger man who began setting up a laptop projector. "Good evening, friends and neighbors," Wilson began, his voice warm and engaging. "Many of you know me from our company's involvement in local events over the past year. Nexus Minerals is committed to being a good neighbor, which is why we're excited to announce an unprecedented partnership with your community." The screen behind him lit up with a sleek corporate presentation. Photos of smiling workers, pristine laboratories, and natural landscapes cycled through. "What you may not know is that the forest surrounding your beautiful town contains something remarkable. Mineral deposits essential for green technology, medical devices, and national security." The presentation shifted to show gleaming electric vehicles, wind turbines, and smartphones. These critical minerals, particularly rare earth elements, are currently sourced almost entirely from overseas, creating vulnerable supply chains and environmental concerns in countries with weak regulations. Eleanor watched faces in the audience, saw heads nodding along. Wilson was good, framing extraction as patriotic, environmentally responsible, even necessary for fighting climate change. "Our proposal is simple," he continued. "Nexus Minerals will invest $50 million to create a state-of-the-art extraction facility, bringing over 200 jobs to your community. We'll establish a $5 million educational foundation, including college scholarships and enhanced science programs in local schools. At this, he gestured toward Eleanor with a smile. We've already begun discussions with your outstanding educators, including Dr. Morgan, about developing specialized curriculum that could make your high school a model for STEM education nationwide. Eleanor felt eyes turning toward her. Her face burned, but she kept her expression neutral. Let him think she was on board for now. We understand the concerns about environmental impact, Wilson acknowledged, his tone becoming more serious. That's why we're committing to protect 80% of the forest preserve, while working in carefully selected areas that our research indicates contain the richest deposits. Research conducted illegally, using a stolen government vehicle, Eleanor thought bitterly. I'll now take questions, Wilson concluded, his practiced smile returning. Hands shot up across the room. The mayor pointed to a local business owner in the front row. What's the timeline for this project? When would these jobs become available? Great question, Wilson responded enthusiastically. We're ready to begin preliminary work within 60 days with full operations within 18 months. More questions followed, about wages, environmental safeguards, traffic concerns. Wilson handled each smoothly, with well-prepared answers that addressed surface-level worries while glossing over deeper implications. Finally, Eleanor raised her hand. The mayor hesitated before acknowledging her. Dr. Morgan, our own scientific expert, he said, a nervous edge to his voice. Eleanor had known him since high school. He could sense something was coming. She stood, folder in hand. The room quieted. Thank you, Mr. Wilson, for your presentation, she began, her teacher's voice carrying clearly through the room. I have some questions about your environmental impact assessment, specifically regarding the endangered species in our preserve. Wilson's smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed slightly. We've conducted thorough ecological surveys. The areas we've targeted for responsible extraction have been carefully chosen to minimize impact. That's interesting, Eleanor replied, opening her folder, because according to these GPS coordinates from your own sampling equipment, you've been collecting data precisely in the habitats of 5 federally protected species. She approached the council table, laying out enlarged photos of the specimen containers from the armored truck, labels clearly visible. These were recovered from a stolen Fish and Wildlife Service vehicle abandoned in our preserve last week. The same vehicle reported missing from a Maryland facility 3 months ago. Wilson's smile vanished. He glanced toward the back of the room, perhaps looking for his own backup. I'm not sure what you're referring to, he said stiffly. Nexus Minerals conducts all research legally, with proper permits. Eleanor placed another document on the table. This is a federal notification that no permits for biological collection or mineral sampling have been issued for the Oak Ridge Forest Preserve in the past 5 years. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Eleanor turned to face them directly. Our forest isn't just trees and dirt. It's an ecosystem that's taken thousands of years to develop. The white-fringed trillium found there exists in only 3 locations worldwide. The soil microbiome contains organisms we're only beginning to understand. Organisms that might hold the key to new medicines or climate solutions. She pulled out charts comparing soil samples. And yes, there are rare earth metals in our ground, but extracting them would require removing the topsoil that's taken centuries to form, diverting waterways that feed our town's reservoir, and destroying habitats that can never be replaced. Wilson stepped forward, his composure slipping. This is ridiculous. You're just a high school teacher. You can't possibly understand the complexities of modern extraction methods. It was the wrong thing to say. Eleanor saw faces in the crowd harden at his dismissive tone. Actually, she replied calmly, before teaching, I spent 8 years in environmental research, specializing in soil ecology of protected habitats. I understand exactly what your methods would do to our forest. She turned to the council. The real question isn't about jobs or economic benefits. It's about what we value most. Once we destroy these ecosystems for short-term gain, they're gone forever. The room erupted in overlapping conversations. Mayor Reynolds banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. Through the chaos, Eleanor noticed movement at the back doors. Agent Whitaker was speaking with 2 uniformed officers who had just entered. Wilson leaned toward his colleagues, speaking urgently. The younger man quickly began disconnecting the presentation equipment. Order, please, the mayor shouted over the noise. As the room gradually quieted, he looked directly at Wilson. I think we need some clarification about these research methods before proceeding further. Before Wilson could respond, Agent Whitaker approached the council table, badge in hand. "Federal agent," she announced. "I'm afraid we need to postpone this discussion. Mr. Wilson and his colleagues are needed for questioning regarding an ongoing investigation into illegal activities on federal land." The room exploded again, this time with reporters pushing forward, cameras flashing, questions shouted from every direction. Eleanor stepped back from the chaos, suddenly aware of a hand on her elbow. Ranger Ben appeared at her side. "Let's get you out of here," he said quietly. "Side door." Outside, the cool evening air was a relief after the heated room. Eleanor leaned against the building, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. "You did good in there," Ben said, handing her a bottle of water. "That took guts." "It was terrifying," she admitted, taking a grateful sip. "I just kept thinking about my students, what I always tell them about standing up for what matters." They watched as Wilson and the other Nexus employees were escorted to waiting federal vehicles. Reporters trailing behind. "What happens now?" she asked. "The investigation continues. With tonight's evidence and public statements, they'll have a harder time covering their tracks. It could take months, but companies like Nexus don't usually survive this kind of exposure." 6 months later, Eleanor stood at the edge of the forest preserve, watching her students spread out along a newly established research trail. A sign at the trailhead read, "Eleanor Morgan Ecological Research Station." Still embarrassing to see her name displayed so prominently, but she was gradually getting used to it. The federal investigation had uncovered corruption reaching into state regulatory agencies and resulted in multiple indictments. Nexus Minerals had withdrawn all permit applications and disappeared almost overnight, their assets frozen pending litigation. More importantly, the preserve had been expanded, with stricter protections established and funding for ongoing research. Eleanor now split her time between teaching and directing citizen science projects, with a research grant that allowed her advanced students to participate in real environmental monitoring. "Ms. Morgan," called one of her students, waving excitedly from near a small stream. "We found one of the tagged salamanders from last month." Eleanor smiled, heading toward the excited group. Finding that abandoned truck had indeed changed everything, not just for her, but for the forest and community she loved. As she walked the familiar path, she reflected that sometimes the most important discoveries aren't things, but moments of choice. Decisions to protect what matters most, no matter the cost.